The iPad Pro and the iPad Air are Apple's two most capable iPads with M-series chips, which are not only blazing fast, but also enable Apple's new AI system, Apple Intelligence. Today, I have the new M4 iPad Pro and the new M2 iPad Air to compare to each other to hopefully help you figure out the key differences and which one is right for you. Make sure to get subscribed to the channel if you aren't already, and let's get into it. Now, starting with the basics, both of these iPads come in two sizes, 11 inches and 13 inches. The Pro comes in space black or silver, and the Air comes in space gray, starlight, purple, and blue. If you're stuck choosing between the 11-inch and the 13-inch model, I'd say that for most people, the 11-inch is the perfect size. The 11-inch size isn't too big to pick up to watch some videos or get some work done, and can even be used one-handed. The 13-inch model is definitely a chunkier device and can be good if you can really make use of that extra screen real estate for tasks like video or photo editing, productivity-related tasks, or if you just want to have the biggest screen for content consumption. In terms of cameras, both of these iPads actually share the exact same 12-megapixel rear-facing camera. They also use the same 12-megapixel front-facing ultra-wide camera for taking video calls or hopping on a conference call. Both iPads also share the same exact 10-hour battery life, charge via USB-C on the bottom, and run the same software, iPad OS. But you may have noticed some differences with the camera assembly in the back, and that's because only the iPad Pro is going to get that LiDAR sensor for 3D scanning, dual-tone flash for better flash photos, and a rear-facing ambient light sensor for better document scanning. In my opinion, none of those sensors are really that important that the Air is missing out on. Something that might be important though is that the iPad Pro has a 4-speaker system versus the 2-speaker system on the iPad Air. This results in the iPad Pro getting a fuller and more bassy sound, whereas the Air sounds a little bit more tinny, but still gets plenty loud and doesn't sound bad at all.
Central men over. Get out of the way! These are direct orders from Army Command! Where is Colonel Mackenzie? Jesus Christ, man! Go and see the captain! Now I want to stop that quickly, you understand? Do you understand?
Now, both of these iPads are built extremely well with aluminum chassis and a modern flat edge design with rounded corners, which not only looks good, but is also comfortable to hold. In terms of weight, the iPad Pro weighs 5 to 6% lighter than the iPad Air, which really isn't a big enough difference to notice when holding these side by side, and especially not in day-to-day use. Whether you're using these iPads in bed, on your lap, on a desk, or are just lounging around on the couch, both of these iPads are gonna feel roughly the same just because they weigh pretty much exactly the same. The two key differences here though are that the iPad Pro has slightly thinner bezels, which give it a more modern and premium look, and the iPad Pro is actually 15 to 20% thinner. This 1mm difference is actually pretty noticeable, and when you go to pick up the iPad Pro, every time you're just sort of in awe of, wow, this is a really thin device. Now, one thing that you'll be doing thousands of times throughout the lifetime of owning these devices is unlocking it. The iPad Pro uses Face ID and the iPad Air uses Touch ID. Both of these biometric authentication systems have their own pros and cons. For example, Touch ID is actually pretty convenient when just holding the device, because when you go to unlock the iPad, your finger is already on that Touch ID sensor. On the flip side though, Face ID is actually really nice when opening sensitive applications, because it'll just automatically scan your face instead of you having to lift your finger up. And even at nighttime, having Face ID automatically scan your face instead of trying to feel around your iPad to find that fingerprint sensor is nice. However, sometimes I find that with Face ID, my hands are actually covering the Face ID sensor, which can get a little bit annoying. Again, both of these systems have their own pros and cons. I personally prefer Face ID. However, I don't think it's a deal breaker for the iPad Air. Now, one thing you might be wondering is the M4 iPad Pro that much faster than the M2 iPad Air? And the answer is mostly no. For casual apps, just your everyday stuff like emails, productivity apps like Notion or Calendar, or just watching your favorite shows or movies, you're really not gonna notice any difference with any of these apps. Both iPads are gonna perform pretty much the exact same. However, if you're looking to do some video editing, for example, or access any pro level apps, then yeah, you might see some slight performance gains with the M4 chip over the M2. In a test done by Max Tech, videos exported about 15% faster on the M4, when compared to the M2. For casual gaming with games like Crossy Road or Fruit Ninja, you're again not really gonna notice any difference. And even for apps like Asphalt 9 and Genshin Impact, they all run very similarly with similar load times and similar graphics settings. But at the end of the day, these two iPads are gonna perform pretty much the same for 95% of people. I think you'll probably know who you are if you do fall in that 5%. If you're planning on using these iPads for really pro and niche applications, then yeah, you might see some differences. But for the average Joe, really, it's not gonna matter. Okay, so now we're getting into the biggest difference between these two devices, and that is the display. Now, when evaluating a display, there are four main things to consider: sharpness, contrast, color, and brightness. Starting with sharpness, both of these displays are actually equally sharp at 264 pixels per inch. This is more than enough for reading documents, emails, and just rendering small text in general. Both displays are capable of being extremely sharp thanks to the high pixel density. However, this is about where these similarities end, because in the other three categories, color, contrast, and brightness, the iPad Pro absolutely dominates. The iPad Pro uses Apple's tandem OLED displays, whereas the iPad Air uses an LCD display. With OLED, you are of course getting huge gains in contrast because the pixels can individually turn on or off. With a 2,000,000:1 contrast ratio, the blacks are deep and inky on the iPad Pro, whereas on the iPad Air, it can look a little bit more on the gray side. Also, with the stacked OLED displays, the iPad Pro reaches a peak brightness of 1,000 nits, whereas the iPad Air tops out at 500. In actual testing though, the iPad Air's 500 nits was actually plenty enough for just regular indoor use. I think where you're really gonna notice a difference though is if you wanna use these iPads in like really bright, extremely glary windows or weird situations, or if you wanna take these outside. In these situations, the iPad Pro's extra 500 nits will definitely come in handy. The iPad Pro also spikes all the way up to 1,600 nits for HDR content for those specular highlights that you might see in an explosion in a movie or a really bright light source in a game, while bringing out these really vibrant, vivid colors that really immerse you in the content on the screen. But then maybe the biggest or smallest difference between these two, depending on who you are, is the 120 Hz Pro Motion display on the iPad Pro versus the 60 Hz refresh rate of the iPad Air. The 120 Hz gives you those ultra smooth animations when scrolling around the UI, browsing the web, or doing pretty much anything. It just feels way more crisp when scrolling around a document, and the device just feels snappier. If you're an illustrator or an artist, the 120 Hz display paired with the Apple Pencil is gonna feel more smooth and natural, as the lines that you're drawing are just gonna follow the pencil a lot closer. Now, one last difference I wanna point out is that on the iPad Pro, you have the option of going with a nano texture display on the 1 and 2 terabyte models. This really isn't something that I would recommend to most people unless you're already willing to spend $1,700 on the iPad Pro. It does make the image slightly less crisp and less vibrant, but for those who want to completely eliminate reflections, it can be nice. All right, now wrapping it all up, of course, we can't forget about accessories like the Magic Keyboard and the Apple Pencil. Now, I'm happy to report both of these iPads actually support the new Apple Pencil Pro with barrel roll adjustment and a new haptic feedback system with a squeeze gesture. They're both also gonna support the older 2nd gen Apple Pencil if you have one of those lying around. As far as the keyboards go, both iPads have their own respective Magic Keyboards, which cost $300 for the 11-inch size and $350 for the 13-inch size. These keyboards feature a fully backlit keyboard and trackpad. They use a magnetic mount for easy attachment. They're also suede lined to protect the back of your device and give you an extra USB-C port for pass-through charging, opening up the port on the actual device for external storage or peripherals. In my opinion, having a keyboard case with a trackpad is definitely a must-have for these devices if you want to use them for any sort of work. Now, key difference between the iPad Pro's keyboard and the iPad Air's keyboard is that the iPad Pro's is not only made of a more premium aluminum material instead of the rubber on the iPad Air's keyboard, but more importantly, it also features a full function row, whereas the iPad Air's Magic Keyboard doesn't, despite costing the same. Thankfully though, there are third-party keyboards made by other companies, which I can definitely recommend and will leave links to down below for you to check out. Now, both devices are limited to just one USB-C port, but the slight difference here is that the iPad Pro uses Thunderbolt USB 4 and the iPad Air still uses USB 3. Now, my opinion here is that unless you're planning on transferring files from an external Thunderbolt 4 drive to your iPad a lot, this difference in USB 3 versus USB 4 really isn't that big of a deal. And actually for me, all of my SSDs are still on USB 3. And so you have to make sure that you have a Thunderbolt 4 compatible hard drive to even take advantage of it. The one accessory I do have though is a Thunderbolt 4 dock, which only really works with the iPad Pro. In terms of connecting these iPads to external displays, both iPads actually have the exact same support, which is either one USB-C display up to 6K resolution or a 4K 60Hz TV through a USB-C to HDMI adapter. Okay, so you've made it to the end of the video, but maybe you're still confused as to which one is right for you. Well, let me break it down for you. So while there are a lot of really subtle differences with the iPad Air and the iPad Pro that Apple makes, like a slightly lighter and thinner device with smaller bezels, better speakers, more sensors, Face ID, all that stuff on the iPad Pro, really at the end of the day, the biggest difference between these two devices is gonna be that display. And the two biggest questions that I would recommend you ask yourself is, how much do I really want the best display? And two, do I have the budget for it? The iPad Air starts at $600 for the 128GB version, whereas the iPad Pro starts at $1,000 for the 256GB. That is $400 that you could either buy an accessory for the iPad or just tuck away in a savings account or invest. That being said though, if you're really on the fence between the two, I'd say if you could spend the extra money, the iPad Pro is definitely the better value proposition in my opinion. Going with the iPad Pro, you really don't have to worry about missing out on any features, not to mention you have the best display that Apple currently makes. With the M4 chip, you've got plenty of future proofing. Overall, the iPad Pro is definitely the more exciting product to use, and if you can stretch your budget just a little bit, I'd nudge you in this direction. However, maybe that's not your thing, and maybe your priority is budget and just having a new device that supports the new Apple Pencil and is great for productivity. In my testing, I've never once looked at the iPad Air's display and said, oh, that looks trash or that looks terrible. A saving of $400 to $500 is pretty significant, and the best argument for the iPad Air is that it can do 99% of what the iPad Pro can do. So yeah, I hope this video helps you out and clears things up for you. If you enjoyed the video and you're feeling generous, all of the links to these products and accessories will be down below, which are gonna be my affiliate links. Of course, consider subscribing to the channel if you aren't already. Leave a like on your way out, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.